censoring people who don't agree with you is a lose-lose situation for everybody. Because like you say, once the principle of censorship has been brought in, once you can say on this area of public street, on this area of public land, you cannot express a view or even think a view contrary to the opinion of the state, then you can apply it to anywhere else.
Coming up on British Thought Leaders, I sit down with Lois McLatchie Miller, a cultural commentator who works for ADF, a faith-based advocacy organisation that protects fundamental freedoms. Lois talks about censorship zones around abortion clinics and the worrying phenomena of people being charged with thought crimes.
There is certainly a cultural drive to make it very difficult for people to express beliefs that are more traditional, that are more conservative, maybe have a Christian ethos in them. We can see this with abortion, with belief in male and female and the differences between them, and supporting each to thrive in their own sex.
She warns that not speaking openly and valuing our freedom of speech could lead down a dangerous path of censorship.
But I think those with conservative values or with Christian values or whatever, however they define it, I think it's important that they make use of that free speech and that space and engage respectfully, but remember to engage and not just be kind of silenced through a cultural censorship, because that could be just as damaging as if it's a kind of state-imposed censorship. And in fact, a cultural censorship enables and empowers a state censorship.
I'm Lee Hall. This is British Thought Leaders. Lois McLatchie Miller, thank you for joining us on British Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me.
You've been working on a case of an army veteran who was charged with praying silently in his mind. Could you talk us through what happened?
It's an incredible case. You would think this was 1984, but in fact it's 2023 in Britain. And yet a man praying solely in his head without expressing any form of opinion or protest or overt public expression has now been placed on trial. I'll take you back to the day it happened to kind of talk through the story. Adam, as you mentioned, is an army veteran. He served in Afghanistan because he believes in fundamental freedoms and democracy and the things that the values that Britain was built on. And he also carries a little bit of a personal story in relation to abortion. So 22 years ago, he actually paid for an abortion for his then girlfriend. It's a decision that to this day fills him with deep regrets and remorse, and he feels he could have handled that situation a lot better. And it's something that he feels driven to pray about, that situation all those years ago, and then with sympathy to the men and women who are dealing with that difficult decision today about abortion, he feels drawn to pray for them too. So Adam was out, he stopped by an abortion facility in Bournemouth, and he prayed in his mind.
We've discussed the fact that you're stood behind the tree, so most of the time you're out of sight of the clinic, you're not approaching anybody,
No, I'm not.
You're not overtly protesting, praying, anything like that. So my understanding is, and her understanding is, what you're doing now, you can do.
Yeah, that would be my understanding as well.
And literally, like I said, in 20 years of doing this, I've never dealt with a breach of a PSBO. So it's new for me as well, which I had to have a proper read of it, because I don't want to come in and say, right, you're under arrest and put my hands on you, because then I'd assault you.
Yes.
Well, that's how it is. The same rules apply to me as they do to everybody else.
Yes.
So that's where we're at.
Okay.
I can't make you leave because it's a public place and you're allowed to stand here and do what you're doing.
Yes.
They will call us if you change your behaviour and you start approaching people, you causing issues. I don't think you're going to do that.
I won't be doing. I'm due here until another 20 minutes.
Okay.
So 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I've been here since 10.
Yeah.
And I'll be just continuing to pray in my mind.
Yeah.
I won't be saying anything aloud. I've got my phone with the Bible. I might read some scripture, but I won't be saying anything.
You're entitled to do, aren't you?
Yes.
Because it is England and it's a public place, and you are allowed to do that. Okay.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I think we're done.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Staff, we're not going to go and speak to them again because they've been spoken to by us first, and ASB team, the council, has spoken to them on the phone.
Okay.
So, all right.
God bless you.
Have a good afternoon. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Now, in Bournemouth, and actually across 5 councils in the UK, Local measures have been introduced which ban what they call any form of expression of approval or disapproval of abortion. And in Bournemouth, this specifically lists examples including prayer, crossing oneself, as some people do, reading scripture, and a whole other manner of Christian, frankly, activities. What was not clear was that this would also apply if you're not expressing anything verbally, but merely standing silently with the thought of prayer inside your head.
So the police come and ask you what you're thinking?
Correct. So in multiple circumstances, it's been the police come and ask the individual what they're thinking. In Adam's case, it was local council officers. And when he admitted to them, I suppose, that he was praying inside his head, they issued him with a fine. Adam didn't pay that fine because he felt it went against his conscience to say that in the UK that it's ever illegal to be praying inside one's head. That just sounded too ridiculous, too Orwellian, it couldn't possibly be true. So he didn't pay the fine, and now he actually faced his criminal trial because of these facts, because he prayed near an abortion facility in a so-called buffer zone, and obviously not being able to pay the fine, he now faces criminal charges. So he's pled not guilty, and we'll be seeing his case play out in November in the Pole Magistrates Court.
So when those officers came over, if he said he was thinking about something else, that would have been completely fine.
Right. If Adam had been even speaking loudly, protesting about, say, climate change or another social issue or another topic, that would have been perfectly illegal. But because of the content of the thoughts in his head, because they were specifically about abortion, about it being pro-life, that was why he allegedly broke the so-called buffer zone, or censorship zone, I like to say.
So this is not the first case of this type you've been working on either?
It's not. It's actually the third case, if you can believe it, of thought crime in the UK. I know. So earlier this year, there was two other individuals actually up in Birmingham who were on criminal charges because they had been thinking prayers in their head. One was Isabel von Spruce. She's a charitable volunteer and a pro-life advocate, and she had, for 20 years, has been praying and giving charitable support to women outside abortion facilities. And she was charged in a very viral video, actually, she was arrested for praying inside her head. And similarly, Father Sean Goff, he obviously a Catholic priest, and he more specifically prayed. He didn't pray about abortion. He prayed about free speech. He held a sign outside it, or in the buffer zone, which is about 150 meters wide, covers several streets, and it said praying for free speech, obviously making a bit of a point about this kind of very censorial Orwellian zone. He was charged for that, and also for having a small bumper sticker on his car, which was a year old that he'd forgotten about, and that said Unborn Lives Matter. He had parked his car in the buffer zone, and he was charged for that too. So we're seeing a plethora of criminal charges basically based on pro-life opinion, which some people may disagree with, but it's certainly far from illegal in the UK, and it used to be, in fact, the normal opinion until very, very recently.
So are you expecting, because I know there was a law passed earlier in the year that is bringing in these buffer zones around abortion facilities, are you expecting this kind of thing to increase?
Yes, well, what does remain to be seen is you're right that it was introduced in the Public Order Act that buffer zones or censorship zones would be implemented across the country. That law is yet to be put into action, and right now the government are drafting guidance as to how to implement that law. So this guidance will be used by prosecutors and police, and they'll refer to that to see how they are to implement these censorship zones, and hopefully there will be some sort of guidance as to protecting freedom of thought, which is of course a fundamental human right in international law and domestic law. Nobody should be arrested for the thoughts they have in their head, but it remains to be seen. We wait for that guidance to be published.
So today it's abortion, maybe tomorrow is something else we're not allowed to think about. You're not allowed to have gender critical views, for example, in a certain zone. Yeah, how does this affect the freedom of people in the UK more widely?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point to bring up, because not everybody agrees with Adam or Isabel or Father Sean. Not everybody agrees that, well, they would phrase it like this, that everybody has the right to life, no matter if they're born or unborn, if they're male or female, whatever, characteristic they hold, every human being has the right to life. And they would also say that women deserve far better than abortion, that we're failing women by having such a high abortion rate in this country. Now, I appreciate that people hold different views on this topic, But censoring people who don't agree with you is a lose-lose situation for everybody. Because, like you say, once the principle of censorship has been brought in, once you can say on this area of public street, on this area of public land, you cannot express a view or even think a view contrary to the opinion of the state, then you can apply it to anywhere else. So, it could be that, like, gender critical thought is another view that's often under pressure. Once we have censorship zones for abortion, why not have a censorship zone around another, area of the town that, people might be offended by gender critical thought in? We have to protect free speech for everybody, or else we have free speech for nobody.
So these buffer zones and the new law you're talking about, how does that work?
So it's all done under the auspices of influence. Now, people who have campaigned for buffer zones would say that they are a measure against harassment against women in a very vulnerable state, a very vulnerable day of their lives. And if that was what buffer zones did, that would be great, because no woman should be harassed at any point of her life, let alone on such a difficult day of her life. And I absolutely agree that harassment is illegal, and thank goodness for that. It is already illegal. So there are already powers that exist within the police force to deal with instances of harassment as and when they occur, which, by the way, the data shows is actually not common outside of abortion facilities. The majority of people who are volunteering near abortion facilities are doing one of two things. They're either praying about this very important social issue, which, remember, affects 1 in 3 women in our country. This is something that really affects many people's lives, and why should people who pray not feel that they can pray about this issue? Or they might also be offering charitable support. There are charities that do an excellent work at saying, you know what, there are many women in this country who have an abortion without necessarily wanting to. I think the latest figures from the BBC was almost 1 in 5 women who have abortions would actually prefer not to. So clearly there's other factors at play here. Maybe it's an economic decision, maybe they need better financial support, maybe they need practical support, maybe they're daunted at the thought of motherhood, but would like to rely on somebody for practical supplies and that kind of thing. Maybe it's kind of emotional support. Maybe they just feel unsupported by their friend group or their parents or their partner or whoever it is. But what we can see from that statistic is that there are reasons that are compelling women to do this thing, which is we know is a traumatic decision. We know has repercussions for mental health for women, and that many, including myself, believe is detrimental to the lives of unborn children, and that we can do much better to support all of these groups in society. So these charitable volunteers will offer services and leaflets about help that's available to women, financial, emotional, practical, whatever it may be, so that they have a different choice, that they have options, that they can avoid abortion if they would like to. And I think that's a great thing. And I think whether you call yourself pro-life, pro-choice, pro-abortion, this is something that we can all get behind. Nobody thinks that a woman should be having an abortion against her will. So let's all try and combat that. And that's what a lot of these volunteers are doing outside the clinics. Unfortunately, with the new law that's being introduced through the Public Order Act, this good activity, this good, lawful and helpful activity will now be illegal to stand and offer help, charitable help to women who might want to hear about options available to them.
So the law covers influencing people. Literally, you can start a conversation. And as you say, there's 1 in 5 women don't want an abortion. You'd think that they might kind of appreciate an interception of some sort, but so are we really empowering them by making that illegal?
Right, it's not pro-choice, it's no choice. It's removing options from women. And by the way, if we think about it like this, these are consensual conversations taking place between 2 adults about an important topic. Why should the state come in and censor a conversation, assuming on the woman's behalf that she doesn't want to hear this information? That seems very paternalistic and unsupportive of women to me. There's a campaign group called Be Here For Me. That's where many women have spoken about the positive experience of support that they received when they spoke to charitable volunteers outside the clinic. Invariably, they had been in a situation where they didn't want to have an abortion, but they felt they had no option. They were able to find out about options of support. A lot of them kept their children and now are thriving as empowered mothers. And they've spoken out and said, like, we vulnerable women who were in this situation, we want to keep these options open for future, for other women who are in our shoes. We know what it's like. We want them to have that option of support. So they've been very clear about what they would like to see, but they've been kind of ignored in this conversation because there's this kind of ideological drive when it comes to the A word, abortion. We can be very trigger happy with our censorship because it's such a controversial issue in our society, but this isn't an academic one. This is one that affects the lives of real vulnerable women who would like to know about support available, and it should never have been taken away from them.
So we started with thought crimes, then we moved on to crimes of influencing people, crimes of even starting a conversation. It really does feel like you're dealing with 1984 here.
Quite. I mean, it's become quite cliche to talk about Orwell in modern society, but there really is no other comparison to it than 1984 and the thought police and having a thought crime and being banned for simply having peaceful thoughts inside your head about a topic. The state should never be telling you what you think. Or punishing you for thinking the wrong thought. It's so Orwellian.
I know as ADF you have a bigger branch in America as well. Do you feel it's quite different kind of dealing with abortion issues here than maybe your colleagues in America have? Because I think it's a lot more mainstream to be against abortion in America.
It's certainly a very different culture where it's spoken about a lot more. It's a political issue. It's not a political issue here because all of the main parties would be pro-abortion. So it's less of a divisive kind of voting issue, which means it's less likely to be in the news and the papers and public discussion. And it's quite easy for people, I think, in the UK to dismiss this topic and say, oh, that's an American thing. And that is just, if you beg my pardon, I think that's quite a lazy approach to a very important topic because Britain actually protected life to a far greater extent than America did until a couple of years ago. In America, under their previous legislation, it was possible in some states, and it actually still is today, to get an abortion all the way up to term. Now, Britain has a different approach and had capped abortion at 24 weeks, which was a tighter or a more protective view than the States had. I will say that Britain, in comparison to Europe, is actually a lot less protective of life. So most people don't realize that we have a 24-week abortion cap, and that's about 6 months. So if you think about a 6-month pregnancy bump, it's quite a large baby at that point, quite developed. Most European nations actually cap at 12 weeks or 15 weeks. So we were about double. So we actually have a very, very extreme, I would say, abortion situation here in the UK. And I think, these are people who are living in Britain that we have a duty to be looking at the best policy solutions, to be looking to make sure that women aren't kind of abandoned to abortion and that that's the best option available to them, because no little girl wants to grow up having an abortion. It's never the best scenario. We want them to have empowered choices to become mothers. And we want to make sure that, we are supporting the next generation here in Britain, those unborn babies and young children to be thriving and not kind of tossed aside by abortion. So it is a British issue that I think, we at ADF UK would look at with a very British lens, and it's something that we should be talking about more in this country.
Taking a step back from all of this, it feels like the kind of traditional values and beliefs are in direct opposition to a lot of the more progressive values that we're seeing become more prevalent these days. There's even legal and societal frameworks being put in place so you can't criticize these more progressive values. What does this mean for people with more traditional beliefs in society today? Yeah,
I think, firstly, I challenge the framing of progressivism, because I think we've kind of been put into this box where what we're told is that we're against progress. And I'd say I'm very much for progress. I'm for progressing women's support for women to thrive as mothers. I think it's actually quite regressive to be taking that away from women. I'm supportive of progressing the rights of the unborn, which is an equality issue, because whether black or white, male or female, disabled or not disabled, born or unborn, we should all have rights, equal rights, irrespective of our characteristics. So I think actually the pro-life message is not an aggressive one, but a progressive one. But I understand what you were saying. It is definitely there is certainly a cultural drive to make it very difficult for people to express beliefs that are more traditional, that are more conservative, maybe have a Christian ethos in them. We can see this with abortion, with belief in male and female and the differences between them, and supporting each to thrive in their own sex. It's certainly, a culture can be quite a cancellous one, and I think that really reached its peak a few years ago. I am encouraged in the UK that we have a free speech culture that is probably more aware of some of these issues than other European nations who haven't quite got that culture of protecting free speech, even though we might not agree with each other. So I am encouraged, and I think there's still plenty of space, but I think those with conservative values or with Christian values or whatever, however they define it, I think it's important that they make use of that free speech and that space and engage respectfully, but remember to engage and not just be kind of silenced through a cultural censorship, because that can be just as damaging as if it's a kind of state-imposed censorship. And in fact, a cultural censorship enables and empowers a state censorship. So we want to be able to make sure we are using our free speech in a good, healthy and constructive way, and keeping that space open for this kind of marketplace of ideas, so that we can be looking at advancing great policy that benefits everyone, and don't have policy siloed into just kind of majority mainstream or approved opinion.
There's some interesting examples that happened recently. There was that Finnish politician.
Yeah.
So she tweeted a Bible verse because she wasn't happy that her church was sponsoring a pride event.
Yeah.
And then we also had the British councillor. He had to leave the Conservative Party, and he had to leave his job in nursing because he tweeted something like, pride is a sin, not a virtue.
Right, yeah.
I mean, these are kind of people quoting the Bible, aren't they?
They are, yeah. No, it is shocking. I think these cases are helpful to give us a sharp reminder about what's at stake here. The Finnish politician, that's an ADF international case, and she's actually going to trial in 2 weeks, so keep an eye out for what happens with her. I couldn't believe it that she is on criminal trial a second time for tweeting a Bible verse. It just seems so unheard of and unthinkable. If you told someone in my parents' generation, well, they wouldn't have known what a tweet is, but nevertheless, they would have been shocked to hear that expressing a biblical opinion in the public sphere would be anything but mainstream. So these cases shock, but it's important not to just leave it at shock, but say, okay, if they are able to do this to a politician, a public figure, Päivi, the centre of that Finnish case, she's quite a famous figure in Finland. She used to be the Home Secretary equivalent. If they can do that to her, then how much more can they put fear into and put censorship into the culture of people, ordinary people, who maybe don't have the fame or the legal backing to challenge and to push back and say, you know what, this is a perfectly fine thing to say in a democratic society, and we need to consider these important elements when it comes to this, that, or the other. So I think we should take these as inspiration to be able to talk and to be able to champion freedom of speech for everybody.
I mean, you spend a lot of your time defending people who've been persecuted or challenged over their Christian views. We talk a lot about inclusivity in our society today. Do you ever get the feeling it doesn't stretch to people who have Christian beliefs?
They're certainly on the front line. I'd say that. They're certainly on the front line of the censorship culture, and certainly at ADF International and ADF UK, where I am based, we are always looking out for the interests of Christians who have been kind of silenced from the public square, whether that be a street preacher who was arrested for sharing a Bible verse, or somebody in the workplace who's been kind of discriminated against because of their faith. Christians are warned that these things will happen in the Bible, so it's not unheard of. And of course, ADF International looking overseas in the Middle East and different places in Africa, we can see that the situation for Christians there is far, far worse. So we have that perspective as well. But ultimately, we know that a lot of these values are for the good of people. They come from a place of wanting society to thrive. And they are important issues that we actually have based, society on for many, many years. When Christianity came to Rome, it came to a society where, parents were able to kill their children with very limited legal consequences. Women were second-class citizens, even worse, and they had basically no rights. Sexual immorality was rife, rape was very normal. Christianity came in, and slavery, of course, was rife. And Christianity came in and turned all these things on their head, and they introduced this idea of human equality and brought these fundamental values that we now consider human rights. And we've kind of forgotten that Christianity played a major role in that. But by ousting Christian thought from society, we actually oust a lot of these ideas, which are very pivotal to securing human rights, and that our British Parliament and what we consider to be very normal, like free speech, democracy, all of these things, they have Christian origins. So putting Christianity out of the public sphere can only lead to something that's very brutal, a difficult form of cancel culture, something that people are not considered equal based on just their humanity, but considered, better or worse based on different traits that they have. By throwing out, if you don't like Christian society, you're going to like post-Christian society even less, because it's just so much more unequal and awful. Whereas Christianity actually had the solutions, and not always perfectly modeled out by humans, because humans are flawed, but the ethos and the thought and the principles that were introduced through Christianity in the Bible have been a great triumph for humanity.
You say that these values are more universal. Do you think we kind of need to get to the point where people can put aside their differences, like, Christian people being persecuted, Jewish people being persecuted, and just look for ways we can unite? Because it feels like our very values are under attack these days.
Yeah, I think you can unite with anyone who's on the same side of your cause. I think that's a great principle to have. We certainly have it. ADF stands for Alliance Defending Freedom. Alliance is in our name, and we'll build alliances with anybody who agrees with us on a specific issue. So with free speech, for example, we might not agree with everybody's use of free speech. They might be, I would support free speech, even though I am fundamentally pro-life. I would support someone else's free speech to disagree with me and to support abortion, because then we can have a conversation. If one of us is censored, then we don't get to have that conversation, and we cannot come to understand each other. We cannot come to find solutions which actually empower and help people in society, but rather it becomes more divided, more resentful. So we can see that play out on different issues. So I think you can find, one issue that you connect with someone on, and great, champion that together. It doesn't mean you're going to be working with them on everything else that you work on, but I think that's a good principle to have.
Lois McLatchie Miller, thank you for joining us on British Thought Leaders.
Thank you so much.